The warp is in many ways a mirror of our reality. Like a dark and fathomless pool, its surface ripples with the impact of momentous events or great outbursts of passion and emotion. The resurrection of Roboute Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines during the Ultramar Campaign in 999 M41, sent bold waves of psychic energy rolling outward through the Immaterium, raising tsunamis of turmoil that did not go unnoticed. One by one, the champions of the dark gods of chaos became aware of the resurrected Primarch. Upon far-flung hill walls, Magnus the Red and the Death Lord Mortarion received word of their brother's awakening. The reactions were as different as fire and ice. Mortarion raged, a cold and virulent storm of anger whirling around until its echoes in real space seeded 7 new and terrible plagues. Mired amid plans that were nearing fruition, the demon Primarch of the Death God Traitor Legion could not yet act to strike at Guilliman. Instead, as he stared with glowing eyes across the mist-wreathed parade grounds of his plague planet and the massed ranks of Death God there assembled, Mortarion vowed that he would render Guilliman and his empire to rot soon enough. Magnus, by comparison, gave a booming laugh of utter delight, like a fortune teller who flips the final tarot card and gains sudden insight. The Crimson King saw now before him paths of glorious fate, where before had been a wilderness of confusion. Magnus began to issue orders, his words bursting forth as swarms of crystalline insects. They flitted away to marshal the thrall bands of his once proud Space Marine Legion, the Thousand Suns. Already the Cyclopean demon Primarch had revenged himself upon one hated foe of old, setting the Fenris system of the Space Wolves alight in the fires of retribution. Now he saw a chance to punish another. That chance came after Guilliman had thrown back Abaddon the Despoiler's assault upon Ultramar. Guilliman had assembled a vast fleet with the intention of traveling through the growing instability of the warp in the wake of the 13th Black Crusade to Terra, to meet with his father the Emperor of Mankind for the first time in 10,000 years, and determine how best to save the Imperium from the growing threats all around it. Magnus saw the chance to strike against this so-called Terran Crusade when Guilliman's fleet had reached the trailing edges of the permanent warp rift known as the Maelstrom, which was swollen with fearsome new power. The fleet's navigators moaned and screamed, describing something akin to an endless, impossibly immense tornado thundering in the warp. The fleet's captains ordered immediate translation to real space, just to find themselves perfectly ambushed by dozens of traitor Thousand Suns warships. At the heart of the enemy hung a strange craft of surpassing immensity, vast as a planetoid, bristling with gun decks of baffling shape and function, and boasting an immense red crystal eye upon one flank. The insane structure was clearly both flagship and star fort for the enemy fleet. Guilliman knew his brothers well, and here in this grand war engine he saw all the hallmarks of the demon Primarch Magnus the Red. With little choice, the Imperials fought as best as they could in their scattered dispersal. Torpedoes fired from launch tubes, streaking through the void to blast ragged holes in heretic warships. Fighter squadrons scrambled, jetting out into the darkness like swarming insects. Lance arrays spat ruby light, and gun decks thundered as the Imperial ships frantically attempted to fight free of their ambushing foes. Guilliman issued a steady stream of orders to his captains, doing everything in his power to gather his ships and fight back. Inwardly he raged, both at his fallen brother's deviousness and his own failure to foresee the ambush. By comparison, Magnus aboard his vast void craft, Tezca's Revenge, conjured those empiric powers again. A cabal of powerful chaos sorcerers stood around Magnus, chanting ominous words as he raised his arms high. The Crimson King called, and the warp answered, coiling tendrils of power, coalescing to surround Guilliman's battered fleet. Magnus judged the damage done to be sufficient. He had no desire to kill his resurrected brother, not yet anyway. Thus, with a final booming incantation, Magnus completed his spell. The Empiric tendrils clamped tight around the starships of the Terran Crusade, and with a vast convulsive wrench, dragged them deep into the raging heart of the Maelstrom. Guilliman's fleet remained trapped in the Maelstrom, unable to find its way out. Only with the aid of the Eldar Farseer, Eldrad Ultron, were the Imperials at last able to follow a series of landmarks that led to an exit from the warp rift back into real space, and the path led through a vast graveyard of void ships that had not been nearly as lucky. Unfortunately, the way was blocked by a fleet of the Red Corsair's renegade Space Marines, led by the Greater Demon of Tzeentch, Kairos Fateweaver. The Chaos Forces successfully assaulted the Terran Crusade fleet, ultimately forcing the Imperials to surrender when Fateweaver used his command of sorcery to immobilize Guilliman with psychic chains formed from his own guilt and rage at being unable to lead his people out of the Maelstrom for so long. Guilliman and his forces were imprisoned aboard a black stone fortress hidden within the Maelstrom that had been given to the Red Corsairs by Abaddon the Despoiler, but the Imperials were freed from the cells aboard the massive alien star fort by the intervention of the Harlequin Shadowseer, Celandri Veilwalker, and the fallen angel Cypher, in return for Guilliman's promise to allow Cypher an audience before the Emperor once they reached Terra. The Imperials were led into the bowels of the Black Stone Fortress, which housed a massive webway gate. Guilliman defeated the bloodthirster Skarbrand. This needs a video all by itself, and allowed his people to escape into the webway before the gate was sealed behind them. However, this was all part of a plan on the part of Magnus, who had foreseen the path Guilliman would take to return to the Imperial throne world. Guilliman became suspicious of his sorcerer brother's motives. It was Magnus, realized the Primarch. Events began to fall into place in Guilliman's mind. Magnus had hurled Guilliman's crusade into the Maelstrom not to destroy it, but to weaken it. Swiftly and earnestly, Guilliman sought the counsel of his closest lieutenants. They had to determine what Magnus planned, and quickly before they stepped straight into the Demon Primarch's trap. It was Aldrich Voldis, who, drawing upon his knowledge of Titan's ancient libraries, made the intuitive leap. There was a warded entrance to the webway within the Imperial Palace. Voldis believed it to be heavily defended, but still, it existed. Perhaps Magnus knew of this gate, and sought to follow them to it. Guilliman's strategic brilliance leapt ahead once again, tracing patterns within patterns, and perceiving the truth. Magnus already knew where the gate lay, he realized. There had been whispers that the Crimson King had passed that way before, just before the outbreak of the Horus Heresy, and in doing so, unleashed the catastrophe that fell upon him and his 15th Legion. Magnus did not need them to lead him to the gate. He sought instead to follow them through it, clearly hoping that the gate's defenses would be deactivated to allow for Guilliman's arrival. The Demon Primarch wanted to strike at Terra, at the very golden throne of the Emperor of Mankind, and he hoped to launch his attack as the gate was thrown open to permit the Ultramarines' Primarch passage. The Terran Crusade, ironically, could not emerge at Terra. Guilliman realized with something like despair. Not if it meant allowing Magnus to strike at the cradle of humanity. Yet Celandri Veilwalker had never intended for them to take that road. Instead, the Shadowseer revealed a secret that the Eldar had long guarded. Lying dormant for millennia, hidden behind a veil of wards that even humanity's greatest psychers could not pierce, a lonely spar of the webway stretched out upon the border between real space and the warp to connect to Luna, Terra's only natural moon. It was to that illusion-veiled gate that the Crusade must now make haste. Traveling fast, the Harlequins of the Veiled Path led the way. They progressed now through territory that was theirs alone, moving with ever greater speed and confidence as a result. Bands of Harlequins split away into half-glimpsed side passages, or slipped through hollow archways graven from stone. Others returned in similar fashion, filtering in before or behind the massed Imperial tanks and foot troops. Harlequin jet bikes sped overhead from time to time. All the while, Guilliman and his followers kept up a relentless pace, their tanks moving in the vanguard while looping infantry and stalking Onaga Dune crawlers brought up the rear. Guilliman barked his orders, and the loyalists fanned out as one, dropping into firing crouches amidst the crystal outcroppings. From all around, swimming into focus through the veiling mists, came the blooding automata of Thousand Suns Rubricae. The armored golems played their bolters right and left as they advanced, laying down a steady hail of bolts. Hordes of shrieking Zangors moved amongst them, brandishing silvered blades. Guilliman's warriors fired back, sending many of the ambushers reeling as their armor was rent and the dust that animated it spilled onto the ground. Cypher span and dove through the mayhem, evading every shot fired his way and reaping a tally of the foe with his blazing pistols. Aldrich Voldus too wrought havoc as he led a counterattack against the Thousand Suns. His warhammer swung in lightning fast arcs, battering Rubricae to the ground amid clouds of glittering dust. Still more Rubricae closed in, their sorceress masters upon their flying discs, hurling their spells into the loyalist ranks. Guilliman realized that to stay here was to fight an impossible battle and to be lost with his goal in sight. It enraged the Primarch to run yet again, for it seemed to him that since leaving Ultramar he had done little else. Yet the greater goal was of more importance, and he knew that he would not aid his father's Imperium by dying here. Blade raised high, Guilliman led the movement to break out of the Thousand Suns ambush. Not all of his battle brothers could extract themselves from the fight safely, and more precious lives were lost along with the gene seed within them as Space Marines were cut down by the enemy's fire. Yet with the winged living Saint Celestine cutting a path at their head, the loyalists broke away from their attackers and fled deeper into the webway. They found themselves beset at every turn, Rubricae and Zangors bursting from side passages or holding junctions against them. Still the loyalists pressed on, smashing headlong through every ambush and blockade, with Guilliman, Voldus, Greyfax, Celestine and Cypher at their head. At last, the Imperials reached a rune-sealed portal. Then, led by the Shadowseer, they stepped from the webway and onto the service of Luna. The Terran Crusade had emerged into a deep crater, much of which was immersed in inky blackness. Shafts of stark illumination fell from above, where the rays of Sol itself spilled over the lip of the deep pit. Conscious of the foes following close on their heels, the loyalists climbed quickly up to the pit's sides. Space Marines sprang upwards hand over fist in the low gravity, only 1/16th that of Terra. Tanks threw up drifting fans of moon dust as they powered up the rocky slope. Skitarii marched relentlessly upward, ignoring their blackening and freezing organic components. These latter soldiers would not last long on the lunar service, but they would endure long enough to serve the Omnissiah's needs. Above them, Celestine soared upward into the dark skies. Veilwalker and her harlequins lingered by the webway gate. The Shadowseer gathered her powers, leveling her staff towards the webway portal and beginning a whispering chant. The runes upon the structure's flanks glowed fiercely with a searing light. Before Veilwalker could finish her ritual, the gate pulsed with dark energies. Blue fire billowed, its roar sounding as a dull rumble in the airless conditions. Veilwalker span clear at the last moment, but many of her harlequin followers were not so fortunate. Their bodies were engulfed in flame, and as the Deathedy suits burned away, so their bodies melted like wax or froze and died. From near the lip of the crater, Guilliman looked back to see the corrupted webway gate glowing with dark fire. Streamers of energy leapt and coiled, dancing across the walls of the pit and blasting the elder corpses to ash. Out from that crackling storm stepped the first Rubric Marines, their footfalls muffled as they advanced across the crater floor. They raised their bolters and opened fire, cursed shells roaring up from below to slam into the Imperials. Guilliman knew that the warp phenomena currently erupting in the crater's depths must surely have triggered every alarm and emergency auger within a dozen Terra souls. It would not be long before overwhelming Imperial forces raced to investigate, but there was no telling what irreversible havoc Magnus could cause before they arrived. Guilliman saw again the visions Kairos had sent him, of a shattered world crashing down upon a fire-blackened Terra, and shuddered. He and his followers must hold the enemy here, driving the Thousand Suns back, or at the least keeping them suppressed until aid could arrive. Alright guys, what happens next between Guilliman and Magnus the Red, the Thousand Sons and the Terran Crusade is for another video. Thanks a lot for watching, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to stay tuned for more.